Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Um, Here we are again, picking up with Gad from last week. And we will spend the first maybe quarter, who knows how long it's going to take to finish up discussing Gad, and then move on to Asher. So, where we left off with Gad was in spending quite a bit of time last week talking about his conception, what new force Leah introduced into Am Yisrael with through bringing Zilpah into the family dynamic, the naming of God. Why am I frozen? Am I frozen for you? Did I just freeze for you, or did I just freeze for myself?
We can hear you. Your face froze for a microsecond, but your voice keeps on going.
So
So
long as my voice keeps on going, then that's what. If my voice does lock out for whatever reason, please do let me know.
I hear you
Okay.
fine.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so where I spent a lot of time last week talking about the etymology of the name God, and specifically about the preservation of that somewhat um, treacherous and difficult Bagad Shoresh, and how we can see a little bit of a dark shadow to God's otherwise erstwhile fortunate nature. God is as generally being understood as the fortunate son, or the son of Bar Mazal. And then we moved on to talking about the tribe, and how the tribe really embodies the warrior, the warrior aspect that Yaakov Avinu had been so forward with in his blessing to the tribe, and how God really is takes primacy over Reuven, where we see God and Reuven often pairing together because they decided to pair in their assumption of the Nachalot on the eastern side of the Jordan. God is going to God is going to repeatedly come before Reuven. And I did a quick survey of a number of different examples of where God appears before Reuven. And then I believe that I ended off with even talking about his Nachala, which, if I'll take us to the map here, generally is understood as north of Reuven. This is reflective of my map here, is reflective really of Yehoshua, of the division of the tribes in Yehoshua, and the cities that were allotted to God versus the cities that were allotted to Reuven. But if we were to look at the division of the Nachalot in Bamidbar, in Sefer Bamidbar, because obviously these two tribes inherited their Nachala already in the wilderness stories of Chamisha Chomshei Torah. Then what we'll find is that God really has a circle of cities around Reuven. These are two different versions of the contours of their Nachala. I don't have time now to go into why there are almost competing versions. I would just say that it's very likely that they reflect different periods in history, and that the description in Yehoshua reflects an earlier period in history, and the description in Bamidbar reflects what will eventually happen, which is that God will eventually wring Reuven, because God, as the stronger and prime of the two, needs to defend his older brother against threats from Moab coming from the south, threats from Ammon coming from the east, and threats coming from the north, whether we're talking about Ammon up here, or Aram and other northern kingdoms, that God will have to buffer Reuven from. So I bring that here, even though we're not talking about his Nachala right now, just to illustrate the primacy of God over Reuven. As the Nitziv has told us, he's the wealthier tribe. As we saw, he is the more vocal and strident and assertive tribe. And we also see that he's just the more powerful tribe. And so that's where we left off. I had said that there were a couple of loose ends with God that I had wanted to get to. And um, First here, I'll just demonstrate even throughout the continuation of the biblical narrative. Here we're in the book of Shmuel, the first book of Shmuel, where the land that is the Transjordan land is interchangeably called Eretz Gad v'Gilad. That now it is true that Gilad is north of the area of Ruvain, but Gilad is generally associated with Menashe. And so so if we're talking here about Eretz Gad or Gilad, notice that it doesn't say here Eretz Ruvain Gad v'Gilad, but just Eretz Gad v'Gilad, implying that Ruvain has almost been subsumed under the umbrella or under the shadow of Gad. And we see this again, not only in all of those allusions textually and here explicitly, I would argue textually, but we'll also see this as played out in the archaeological record, which I'll get to when we at the end of the discussion of God. So moving along to those loose ends that I had meant to get to last week, but we're getting to now. So first, this wonderful midrash in Psikta Rabati, which I had brought before in the context of Dan. It's a midrash about Yoav ben Tzruya, the Sar Tzava, the general of David HaMelech, and David has charged him. Can everybody hear me? Because I heard someone. Yep. Okay. David has charged him with taking a census, which is disastrous because you're not meant to count Israel unless there's by divine decree. And so Yoav is trying every which way to get out of this task. And what does he do? He goes to the two tribes that he feels will help him in this regard. First tribe that he goes to is Gad, because he's like, nobody is more obstinate than God, right? Or more aggressive than God, or be the first one to say, no dice, we're not interested. We don't want to have that curse upon us. So that, of course, is a midrashic layer. Nowhere do we see in the text that Yoav specifically went to God and said, "It's time for us to take a census of your tribe." He just the midrash here, and you can read it in the translation, is reminding us about how the personalities of the tribes factor into later storylines. So if Yoav is going to try and do everything he can to stymie David's plan to take a census, he's first going to go to God, with whom he would have the best chance of having non-cooperation. It doesn't work out that way, but then he goes on to Dan because his thinking is, as I had brought in the context of the Shiurim on Dan, if any tribe has to be punished, let Dan be punished because they're the idolaters. So that's just a glimpse into how the rabbinic concept maintains the character of the tribe through numerous different stories, which I really find delightful. Okay. So now we get to a point which I had thrown out last year, but I think is clutch, and that is the golden boy of God, is someone who we're all familiar with, and that would be Eliyahu Hatishbi. And that this is something that we'll see in numerous different iterations of the Midrash, but I bring you here Bereshit Rabbah, Batomer Leah, in Leah's naming of this son. She says, Bagad, fortune has come. What does it mean, fortune has come? One version that we saw the Targum Yerushalmi last week, where the Targum said, fortune has come because this one will inherit the first Nachalah ever, right? God and Ruvain are going to inherit the first portions of broader Israel. So fortunate is he indeed. And here's a different reason why he is fortunate. At Yagada de Beta, fortune has come to our house. At Yagada de Alma, fortune has come to the world. Bami sha'atid ligaded mashtitan shel ovdei kochavim. One has come who will in the future cut down all of the foundation of idolatry. Umano Eliyahu. Who are we talking about? Eliyahu. So in the Bagad naming, oh, a new element has come into Am Yisrael's existence, and that is the potential for Eliyahu Hanavi. Now, there is going to then be recorded in the Midrash Machloket, and I had said that it's not 100% clear that Eliyahu is from God. That's just, I think, a prevailing opinion. There are those who will say Eliyahu is from Shevet Levi, and there are those who will say he's from Shevet Binyamin. And that's the ones who, for instance, Rabbi Eliezer says he's from Shevet Binyamin, and he brings a proof text from Chronicles where the names of Binyamin's descendants are provided, and among them is a fellow named Eliah. Now,
Do you
there's
think that Had Gadya could be an allusion to Eliyahu Hanavi at the end of the Seder?
perhaps, but I'm going to ask that we hold all questions and thoughts and jot them down and write them also in the comments, and we can definitely get to them. It is very important to note how critical Eliyahu is throughout all of Jewish history, including contemporary Jewish history, where we welcome him at every Brit and we welcome him at every Seder. And so hold that thought about the Chad Gadya and Eliyahu, and see if we can, think more about that at the end of the shiur. But here, just to understand the internal logic of the Midrash and the machloket here among the Tanaim, is that Rabbi Eliezer is going to say, well, we have the information that we have about Eliyahu in the narrative of the Book of Kings doesn't provide his tribal identification. But if we were to look in Chronicles, then we see here that there is a descendant of Binyamin named Eliah. So that would perhaps indicate that he is a Benjaminite. Reb Nehorai Amar, Mishal Gad. Now, Reb Nehorai is going to say that he is from Gad. Why? Because in the stories involving Eliyahu during the reign of Achav, we're talking about the 9th century BCE, Eliyahu being a historical figure. He is described as Eliyahu Hatishbi mitoshve Gilad. He's described as being among the residents of Gilad. Now, Gilad is a geographical region that we saw in Shmuel, in Sefer Shmuel, is not quite interchangeable with Gad, but is very close to the territories overlap. Again, let me just pull out my map here. These up here are called Hare Gilad. Up here, opposite Beit Shan, you can start seeing Hare Gilad. Beit Shan's right over here. And Gilad stretching to around over here. This area. So for those who would like to argue, and it's a big machloket, does God's territory extend into the mountains of Gilad? Because we know over and over again that Gilad is associated with Menashe. Then I drew my map with a lot of controversy for those who care as to where exactly God's Nachala is. Does it end over here by the Yabok, or does it end up here or a little bit further up north, perhaps over here, up here by the Kinneret? In any event, I drew this midrash. It was in my mind when I decided to have God extend up here into Hare Gilad. Not the only reason why. There's plenty of other reasons why God would be having that finger extending up to the west of Menashe. But getting back to our Eliyahu story here. So Rav Nehorai says he's from Gad. Just to get to there's this back and forth and textual argument as to whether he's from Binyamin, whether he's from Gad. But I love this final statement of the Midrash because I think it really reflects something which I came to understand and really have been trying to convey in these shiurim. Pamachat nechleku raboteno badzavar. There was like a discussion on the matter over which there was a difference in opinion. Elo Amrim Mishal Gad. There was the Reb Nehorai camp who said this is Eliyahu is from Gad. Elo Amrim Mishal Binyamin. And there are those who said he was from Binyamin. And how do you solve a rabbinic problem, right? You call upon Eliyahu. He's always the one with all the answers. Somebody should write a dissertation, if it hasn't been written yet, as to how often Eliyahu is called upon to solve the machloket. So, Ba be'amad lifnehem, Eliyahu himself appears. Amar lahem rabotenu ma atem nechlakim alai. And he says, what are you fighting about? Ani mibnei baneha shel Rachel, ani. It doesn't matter if I'm from Gad or from Binyamin. The Ikar is the mother. And that's what I keep on getting back to, is that's why I find it so important to discuss Rachel and Leah specifically. Yes, tangentially also Zilpan Bilhah, but where they are in the conception of their sons, and how these two women form the two streams of the Bnei Yisrael. What Eliyahu is saying here is that if you want to understand who I am a ben Rachel. You can call me a ben Gad or a ben Binyamin, but what's most important is that I am a ben Rachel. And so I have other midrashim here that want to find Eliyahu in the biblical text. So if what we saw before was Bagad, fortune has come, right? And Eliyahu HaGiladi, Gilad being synonymous with the area of God, then there's another midrashic source here that says, yes, again, we want to claim that Eliyahu is from God, because in the blessing that is given by Yaakov to God, the language is God gidud yigudeno v'hu yagud akev, that God is that God will either troops will troop against him or troops will troop out from him, right? Depending on the Rashi versus Ibn Ezra reading of that from last week, we explored that. Le'oto shehu ba be'akev. The meaning of v'hu yagud akev, I had translated last week as, and he will return complete, that he will fall back in full formation. A cave means turning back, or the heel, right? He'll turn heel in full formation. He will surge ahead of Am Yisrael to fight the wars on the western side of the Jordan. But when it comes time for him to return back to his Nachalah, he will not have suffered any losses. Now, the Midrash says, God gidud yigudenu v'hu yagud akev, lo toshahu ba be'akev. What this means is that troops will surge forth from God, and he will form the last troop. Akev meaning the end, the heel being the end of the body, or the he who will come at the end. Lo to shehu ba be'akev, he who will come at the end of time. Hine anochi sholech lechem et Eliyahu hanavi shehu meshevet Gad. L'kach ne'amar v'hu yagud akev. Akev meaning, again, the end. So there's another textual idea there, or textual pin for having Eliyahu coming from Shevet Gad. Conceptually, I see I'm like, you can still hear me all right. I'm just getting caught up by seeing myself freezing. Conceptually, when we talk about a figure like Eliyahu, we tend to associate with a Pinchas figure. That's why he's often given the pedigree of a Levite and not a Gadite and not a Benjaminite, because of his kanaut, because he is described as zealous for God the same way that Pinchas is. When it comes to Eliyahu Hanavi and his connection, his conceptual connection to God, I think that it's very much rooted in the assertiveness of the tribe, and it's also rooted in the military, the willingness to to take up arms. So I'll just read to you a line or two of the rationale beyond the fact that we describe him as Eliyahu HaGiladi, right? But why do we want to have Eliyahu as the golden boy of God specifically? Because he was confident, he was aggressive, and he had a militant nature. In addition, God's territorial isolation, which was on the other side of the Jordan, is in consonance with Eliyahu's elusiveness, right? And his penchant to appear in fits and spurts. Eliyahu does not walk among the population the way that Shmuel did. He wasn't, one can say he wasn't present within Am Yisrael. He was an elusive figure who was always on the outskirts of the nation, which reflects God's relative isolation in choosing a nachala so distant from the center. With that, I want to move on to a final aspect of God, which I find very curious. Again, kind of blowing up here what we might have just dismissed as a quote unquote minor tribe, right? God, we knew very little about. He's like, and now I feel like there is much more heft to this tribe, including Eliyahu Hanavi, who brings with him, he's not a lightweight. He brings with him a certain gravitas in terms of the importance of his character to Am Yisrael, and that he's from God. It tells us a lot about the importance of God. Finally, I want to talk about the centrality of Moshe Rabbeinu to this Shevet, where obviously Moshe Rabbeinu is associated with Levi. And so he and Aharon are the golden boys of Levi, along with Pinchas, one could say. But when it comes to God, it seems that the midrashic take on the blessing that Moshe gives to God specifically centers on Moshe Rabbeinu himself, where Moshe, when blessing the tribe of God, will say, God, I feel you. We have a close connection that is perhaps closer than I am with other tribes. Let's see how this works out. Here I'm bringing Rashi, who is quoting the Sifrei almost verbatim. So I just like the way that Rashi is broken down and formulated. Sifrei being the Midrash Halacha on both Bamidbar and Dvarim, but here I'm just bringing you the Rashi's version, which again is pretty much straight from Sifrei. So can't jump back and forth, but here we're basing ourselves visually. I can't jump back and forth, but we're basing ourselves on the blessing that Moshe has given to the tribe of God, and he starts with Baruch Marchiv Gad. Blessed is he who enlarges God. Milamed shayat chumo shel Gad marchiv holech klapei mizrach. This is, I think, a nod to the reality of God's nachala being eastward of Reuven, not just northward of Reuven, but also skirting on the east and skirting on the south. Blessed is he who enlarges God beyond that which is going to be assigned to him in Sefer Yehoshua. Realistically, reality as defined by what would happen naturally, which is God's takeover of Reuven, or his protection of Reuven on the north, east, and south fronts, is embedded in this blessing that Moshe gives him. Baruch Marchiv Gad. Klavi Shaken dwells like a lioness. Kvi shaya samuch laspar, because he was close to the edge. He was the final border. It's like the border towns that were developed in the 70s by the government, like all of the border towns in the Jordan, right? That were studiously developed to act as a strong border against Jordan. And so that's kind of like how God is being described here. Anyone who's going to be a pioneer on the outskirts of the nation is going to have to be strong, militant, and ready to fight. We saw this language last week, the Taraf Zroa ad Kod Kod, about their prowess in a military sense. Bayare Shitlo. Now, this is where I'm getting to Moshe. Here we have this following verse, which is a strange and abstruse and very difficult verse. And here Rashi, basing himself on the Sifrei and many other Mefarshim, are going to understand the verse as Moshe talking about himself and his relationship with God. Vayare Shitlo, as I had said last week, Ra'ali Tolo Chelek Be'eretz Sichon Va'og, not yet related to Moshe, but God saw, oh, this is the first land that was claimed, that we have conquered from our enemies, and I will claim this, the first to the first. Reuven and Gad, the firstborns of Leah, so to speak, are claiming the first conquest. Kisham Chelkat Mechokek Safun. That's the verse. Because there, in that area, the Transjordan area, the area that is to the east of the Jordan, there is the portion of the hidden lawgiver. That's the translation. And what do we mean? That's how Rashi's translating it. Ki yada asher sham benachlato chalkat stei kvurat mechokek v'hu Moshe. God knew that Moshe would be buried, the mechokek, Misha Kovea Tachukim, he who is going to make the laws, the lawgiver, is going to be, that this is going to be his portion, his eternal portion. He shall be buried in the portion of God, so in the God, the tribe. Kisham chalkat mechokek, there in the portion of the lawgiver was what God the tribe wanted. Safun, mechokek safun, the hidden portion. Otachelka sfuna v'tumuna mikol bria. This isn't a pilgrimage site. We don't know where exactly Moshe was buried. Shneamar v'lo yada ish et kvurato. But God knew that he wanted this land because he wanted to be associated with Moshe. And so Moshe here being the head, that the Moshe came at the head of the people. So not that God came leading the people into war, but that Moshe was the head of the people, and the rest of the blessing, Tzidkat Hashem Asa, that which we had last week, ascribed to God, God having done the righteousness of God and having fulfilled that which God Hakadosh Baruch Hu intended. This translation, this interpretation of Rashi based on the Sifrei is about Moshe. God sought to have Moshe remain part of Am Yisrael physically as well. So he would claim as a nachala, the area that Moshe would be buried in, so that Moshe's burial, though we don't know exactly where it is, would still be within the portion of Am Yisrael, would still be within greater Israel, so to speak. And so here, because I'd like to move on to Asher, Sforno just words it somewhat differently. You can see in the source sheets that were posted about how God specifically wanted this nachala because of Moshe. And if you're going to ask me, as you should, hold up, Tamar. Moshe died on Har Nevo, did he not? And Nevo was a city that was unequivocally granted to Reuven. Then the Gemara, of course, has an answer for you, because the Gemara wants to, the Midrash converses internally. They have these conversations throughout time and throughout Sfarim, but they have there's almost an organic awareness and of the interplay of Midrash. So Midrash, not always, but at times, will take up another Midrash from a different source, and we'll have to explain it. So in this case, what the Gemara is doing is it's saying, well, the midrash, or the way the transmitted tradition of how to understand Moses's blessing to God is that he is saying, God is claiming this nachala so that I may be buried within Am Yisrael's lands. But is this really true? Because Moshe, I'm pretending to speak in Moshe's voice. I died on Har Nevo, and Nevo is in the Nachala of Reuven. So this is where the Midrash will try to reconcile the two, and say, Moshe died in Nachalat Reuven, but he was buried, V'hechan Moshe Kavor, he was buried in Nachalat Nachalat Gad, excuse me, Bechalko Shel Gad. Dichtiv Vayar Reshitlo, because of the textual pin of this verse in Dvarim, of the blessing of Moshe, that God was the one who saw that the first Moshe Rabbeinu should belong to him and his nachala. Umichalko shel Reuven ad chalko shel Gad, kama have arba milin. There's just a little bit of difference between where Moshe died and where he was buried, because they're adjacent to each other. The nachala of Reuven is here, and the nachala of Gad is directly north. Otan arba milin miholicho, but still, once one has died, there is no traveling from point A to point B. Who carried him from his death place of Nevo to his burial place in Nachalat Gad? Malamed Shaya Moshe mutal b'kanfei Shechina. God himself attended to the burial. And I bring you here along the same line, such a Hasidish reading of the pshat, but it's really beautiful and quite clever. And I bring it here in the English because I wasn't able to source it in Hebrew. The Sfat Emet. Regarding the children of Gad and Reuven, I wrote in another place, in the name of, this should be the Rav Simcha Banami Pshischa. I don't know what happened here with my typing. Rav Simcha Banami Pshischa, who is again, anytime I talk about Chassidut or Kabbalah, I come with a great deal of ignorance, okay? But I know that he was a Chassidish sage, and the Sfat Emet, the Ger Rebbe here, is quoting him. Do you remember that verse? Umikne Rav Hayu le Shevet Reuven, Shevet Gad, Atzum Meod. That's in Bamidbar. Regarding Mikne Rav, which we normally translate as many cattle, instead Mikne Rav Hayu le Reuvenim v'legadim Atzum Meod, that they had a kinyan in their Rav, that they had a special ownership, as it were, or a special connection. To be kona a sefer doesn't mean to own a sefer. To be kona a sefer means to acquire a sefer, means that you have a relationship with the sefer, right? You have to work towards a relationship. That they had property of adhesion to Moshe Rabbeinu, not only literally that Moshe Rabbeinu was buried in Nachalat Gad and died in Nachalat Reuven, but that they had a special connection and a kinyan in their Rav. So not Mikne Rav, but a kinyan in their Rav. That's so Hasidish, right? But it's wonderful. So just to wrap up this idea of God, much of last week was talking about, I would say, the classic idea of God being the warrior Shevet and the aggressive Shevet, and I think that that's very much sourced in his birth story and the concept behind his conception that Leah conceived of, because otherwise he wouldn't have been conceived. And then today was, this first part of the shiur was more about moving towards who the golden boy of God was, Eliyahu Hanavi, and the specific special relationship he had with Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, briefly, before we move on to Asher, I want to talk about Gad, Nachalat Gad. So here you see a zoom in of the area that's really much more Reuven, meaning that everything north of Nachal Arnon is considered Israelite. And here I'm talking about from the, let's say, the 13th century BCE in the wars of the Israelites led by Moshe and Yoshua against Sichon, Melech HaAmori, Melech Heshbon, and Og, Melech HaBashan. So if Heshbon is over here, Bashan up here, this area, this was the area conquered by the Israelites. So you see here, Nachal Arnon is the southern border of Reuven. So here's Nachal Arnon. South of Arnon is Moab, and east of Reuven would be Ammon. Amman is pretty much the modern day city of Amman, or Rabat Amman, is more or less over here. So this is the area that was meant to be Reubenite. However, if we look at some of these main cities, Atarot and Dibon and Medbar, Madaba, these are cities that were assigned to God in the version of the contours of the Nachalot in Bamidbar, not in Yoshua. So what are we doing here with God having holdings and cities both in and around Reuven? And the answer, I think, really, again, I mentioned it before, but now I'm going to give it some heft, lies in this. This, I must have mentioned in an earlier shiur, the very famous Mesha Stela, which is in the Louvre, because it was discovered in the late 19th century by the French. So anything that's discovered by the French is going to end up in the Louvre. Anything that's discovered by the British is going to end up in the British Museum. And they basically divided all the bounty between them from the late 19th century archaeology revolution. So the French were digging here in Dibon. And when they were excavating, they found this stela that had been a monumental, triumphant inscription commissioned by Mesha, the king of Moab. Now, he is a biblical figure who's known to us from the second book of Kings, I believe it's the first chapter, even of the second book of Kings, and in his wars against the Omride kings, Omri and Achav, and the descendants of those kings from the 9th century BCE in the Israelite kingdom, the northern kingdom. Now, there are differences in the biblical account and Mesh's account. Those are obviously of great interest, but that's not what I'm looking at right now. I bring you this just to demonstrate that this stela, which dates to the mid 9th century BCE, talks about the king of Moab, Mesha, as dwelling in Dibon. So he has conquered north, he has invaded north. And he said that prior to him living in Dibon, Dibon had belonged to God, for the Gadites, not the Israelites, the Gadites. And he mentions also Aroer as belonging to the Gadites. So that here we have extra biblical evidence attesting to the version in Bamidbar of these cities. I'm almost positive that in Bamidbar, Dibon is granted to God, and not Reuven. But even if it's granted to Reuven, historically speaking, these were cities that would have been taken over by the much stronger God, and would have, and to the point where Israel, to the east of the Jordan, at least in this area, would have been synonymous with God, not Israel per se, but God. So if you were an Israelite, then you wouldn't be called a Yisraeli, you would be called a Gadi if you were in this area, and not a Reuveni. So that's just something that I think is a little bit of icing on the cake in terms of our understanding of the primacy of God, of the importance of God, and in general of his role as protector of Reuven. Now, if there are any questions on God, I'm happy to take them now, and then I would like to move to Asher. So let me just take a, yes, I have no sound. Yuda, I hope you got sound. Does everybody else have sound?
Yes,
Yeah?
we have
Okay.
sound all the time.
What does a gerrymander mean? I know
It's
that word, I just don't know
oh,
what it means.
it's from a the way the congressional districts are divided up in a state. And a gerrymander is just what God looks like a salamander, slithering.
Okay.
It's just who thought that that would be a good way of dividing up the population? Like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
people don't live like that. It's made so that some political party or some ethnic group will either be locked out of votes or given votes.
Okay, so I think that pretty much perfectly describes God, right? Or he might have just this happens. This isn't an isolated phenomenon because it happens also with Yehuda and Shimon, and it happens also with Menashe and Issachar, where Menashe becomes just so overwhelmingly powerful and numerous in the north, and Issachar is so weak that essentially Menashe takes over a lot of the cities of Issachar. And that's not necessarily to say that it's a violent takeover. It just could have been some kind of a natural migration and a good positioning for God to protect the to protect his brethren. Okay, for those who say Eliyahu is Levi because of the similarities to Pinchas, the claim is bolstered by similarities between Eliyahu and Moshe, of which there are many, absolutely. And I even have that. I have a section in my book, God and Eliyahu Hanavi, and I'll just a nod to that, sorry, that the Eliyahu's seminal encounter, Eliyahu is linked in the rabbinic mind to the other great prophet, not from the tribe of Gad, but buried in his Nachala, Moshe. This was not a coincidence. Moshe, like Eliyahu, had strong associations with God. And so, even if we're looking at Moshe and Eliyahu and all of their parallels, and then God does figure in both of their characters. Okay, now I'm going to close that, and I'm moving over to Asher. Can everybody see my Daf Mekorot on Asher? Yes. Oh, can you see it? Give me a thumbs up.
Yes,
All
yes.
right, fabulous. Okay, so here we go. Asher, God's younger brother, and I had a much better name for Asher, and that is Luminous Asher and his fabulous women. Okay, that's what I'd like to name this Shevet, this discussion of the Shevet. Luminous Asher and his fabulous women. If we thought that Naphtali was all the great sheikhs, and he is, and then we went to God, and he's also doing pretty well for himself, except for that whole Bagad insertion that we can't get rid of, right? That's his naming. I'm hearing some feedback. Is anyone else hearing feedback? Or maybe it's that someone has their, I'm just going to ask everybody to mute themselves. Okay. Then when it comes to Asher, there's, well, I was going to say there's really nothing bad you can say about him, which isn't entirely true. But we'll get to the one little hiccup that we have. But for the most part, it's really hard to find something that is heavy about Asher. I think that's fair to say. Asher also named like his older brother Gad in that same vein of fortune. But again, without the opprobrium, I don't know if that's the right word. I don't think so in this context, but without the heaviness of Bagad and the treachery of that name. So when it comes to Asher, let's look at his. Let me just pull up my notes here and look at his naming. Breshit Lamed Pasuk Yud Bet and Psukim Yud Bet and Yud Gimel, right after God. Vatelet Zilpa Shevchat Leah Ben Sheni Liakov. So Zilpa is going to birth another child. It was noticed last week that Zilpa doesn't have the herayon. She doesn't have the conception. She just has the birth, and that the sages will say this is due to her slender figure or her age. She was just so young that it never really showed on her. But I think when it comes to Gad and Asher, both of whom are named after fortune and luck. That we're talking about relatively uncomplicated and easy births and just a natural and easy entrance into Am Yisrael. Obviously, with the big caveat that there's no natural and easy entrance of either of these boys into Am Yisrael, would Leah not have manipulated the situation such that Zilpah would be part of the family dynamic? Obviously, she needed to make a concerted effort, a deliberate choice. But once Zilpah was in, the babies came. Ben Sheni liYaakov, Atomer Leah, be'oshri. What fortune, ki ishruni banot. That the girls will deem me fortunate. Now, focus in hard on this banot, because that's going to be Asher's hallmark, his women, his girls, the girls from Asher. In fact, we're not going to be talking about a golden boy from Asher. We're going to be talking about the golden girl from Asher. Ki ishruni banot. The girls have seen me as fortunate. Look, child number 6 already. Batikra et shmo Asher. And so she names him Asher. And I couldn't find anything that has any kind of heaviness in this naming. Leah is at a stage where this is just outrageous. This is son number 6, and one following, kind of close on the heels of the other, Asher following close on the heels of Gad. And if Bagad had that connotation of, this auspicious fortune has come to me, then Asher is just I don't know what else to say. I'm just so fortunate. I feel so blessed, right? I feel so confident in who I am in this family, and so blessed by this child. And look at how Rav Hirsch so masterfully weaves together all of the sub-meanings of Asher. Now, Rav Hirsch is a master grammarian in his own right, but also building off of many centuries of work on biblical grammar that preceded him. He notes, and this is a principle of his, that the trilateral root of the word can be played around with, in that if I look at Aleph Shin Resh, then all formulations of Aleph Shin Resh have to go back to the same essential meanings. But I'm not limited by Aleph Shin Resh, because Shin is interchangeable with Samach. Aleph is interchangeable with Ayin and Chet. And so the interchangeable letters also tangentially carry the same general connotation. Asher is, and here I'm just reading what he comments. On the one hand, relating to Aleph Samach Resh, to bind, that like asir, like someone who is bound, like a captive, right? To bind, osher or eser, which either means 10, or osher, to enrich. Otzer or atzar, like an otzer milim is your vocabulary bank, right? Or an otzar is a treasure to store or to accumulate, la'atzor, with an aleph. Chashar, I'm not familiar with this root, but it means to gather in or to assemble, which is to collect all of the money, to bind everything together. And 10 is an assemblage, right? That's considered far more, and it's a formal assemblage already when you get to 10. And osher, to be rich, right? Where we count I'm someone who is more aware of numbers in the Bible will have to correct me if I'm wrong. I know 6 is an auspicious number, and 7 as well, but 10 indicates wealth, or it indicates a fullness that goes beyond, obviously, the 6 and the 7, but it implies wealth. All of which is why the word ashir is the same root as eser, someone who has many tens. All of which implies an accumulation of forces with varying degrees of intensity. That's fascinating. So, the grouping together, but in various different groups intensities. On the other hand, we also find ashur with the meaning of step or stride, meaning a movement, particularly in a moral or ethical context. Therefore, the root meaning of aleph, shin, resh likely denotes progress, not just movement, but progress, a steady movement towards a greater richness of forces and qualities. That's thank you, Rav Hirsch. Like that's something that is extremely profound because look at what he does with the relative pronoun here. I mean, you can read here for yourself about like the Asherah and Ashrei Ha'ish, right? You're advancing towards goodness. Asherah is a especially auspicious deity. The tree of the deity, excuse me. Finally, asher in the word like in the relative pronoun, right? Like Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach Hashem, right? Like finally, asher is the relative pronoun, always implies a subject or object qualified by a new predicate. That, blessed is the man that that believes in God, or who Asher Yiftach Hashem. Yes, is concretely it concretely presents an object through its characteristics. It is thus the particle of characterization, introducing the object into the framework of its defining traits, meaning that Baruch HaGever is blessed is the man, Asher, but why? In what way? Like, where are you moving to? How are you defining his blessing? Right? Like you're taking the sentence somewhere. That's what the word Asher does. So when Leah says Ba'oshri, when she exclaims upon the birth of this child with my happiness, she meant just as my own births have shown it, so too through the births of Zilpah, my maidservant, is it evident that I am still on my ongoing path towards well-being. Asher implies that movement, but the movement towards progress, movement towards achievement. It's like you've finished your manuscript, you're not done yet. You have to still edit it, but you are deep within that movement. For indeed, in the blessing of children I have received, the women have praised my continuing progress and flourishing. And that's the Ki Ishruni Banot. They have all noticed my forward progression on this front. I'm not done. I still have more children to produce for Yaakov, but the Asher force is I'm fully in it. I've come, I've progressed, not just born, and started, but actually progressed. Thank you, Rav Hirsch, for that. That is it's really profound, that meaning. And then we don't know too much about Asher over the course of his life, but we do see, and I'm going to have to just wrap with him and continue with Asher next week. But so consider this a good introduction to the very fortunate son. We do see in the brachot that Yaakov and Moshe give to Asher. We see only positive, nothing that can be construed as negative, and a blessing of tremendous wealth. May Asher shmena lachmo. Vuhu yitain ma'adane melech. And here, the first translation, which we'll look at other ways to understand this verse as well next week, but the simplest way to understand it is from Asher comes forth oiled bread, rich bread, satiating bread, not some kinds of a barley loaf that's 3 days old, right? But like bounty. V'hu yitain ma'adane melech, and he will give forth the pleasures to the king, right? So already you can already start weaving together what the Midrash is going to do for us, which is going to take us from ki ishruni banot, that the girls see me as fortunate, to start seeing what the Midrash is going to do with hu yitain ma'adane melech, who provides the pleasures, here translated as dainties, right? The pleasures for the king, who's going to provide all of the royal women, who is going to provide the choicest women that kings will covet and want for themselves. It is going to be Asher, who is this wealthy Shevet, who is dripping in oil. And when I say dripping in oil, I am translating from or alluding to a very evocative turn of phrase that Moshe will use in blessing the tribe that harkens back to Yaakov's blessing. If Yaakov says, "Me asher shmeina lachmo," that from Asher comes forth this rich bread, oiled bread. Ula Asher Amar, when Moshe blesses Asher, he says, Baruch mibanim Asher, that blessed among all of my children is Asher, right? One can even say he receives the prime blessing, Baruch mibanim Asher. Yihi ratzoi echav, he will be desired by his brothers. Or as translated here, he's the one that his brothers like the most. V'tovel bashemen raglo, and he dips his foot in oil. Me'asher shmeina lachmo. Barzel nuchoshet min alecha. May your doors or may your locks be made of iron and copper. Ukiamecha dov echa. And like your earlier days be your later days. That's a trend. That's a specific translation that doesn't quite match this translation, but that is, I believe, how Rashi translates that. May all of your youthful experiences be maintained into your maturity. May you always stay, what's that song? Young? Like what, always stay. I don't know, there's some song about maintain.
Bob Dylan wrote, "May you stay forever young."
May you stay forever young. Exactly. So if anyone's going to stay forever young.
Hymn. It's a beautiful hymn. But I actually played it at my son's bar mitzvahs. So
really?
It's
okay. So that's ukiyamecha dovecha. That's what Rashi says. May you stay forever young. And we'll explore what that means in specifically when it comes to Asher and his specific blessings next week. But if there are any questions, then I'm happy to take them now. If not, I'm going to just give a 30-second summary of what we spoke about, so it'll stay, something to think about over the course of this week, and then pick it up next week. So Asher, first, I don't see any. Oh, I do see maybe some questions. Thank you. Okay, hold on one second. Yes. Okay, so here we go. First of all, why did Leah need Zilpah? She was having so many children. Not sure I addressed that last week. Yes, I did, Rosie. I did address that last week. That Leah felt, and I addressed it with God specifically, because that's what was born from Leah's assertiveness. That Leah, either due to this new the newfound security that Rachel was feeling in the family, or that Leah sensed, in that not only was Rachel the beloved, the natural beloved of Yaakov, but also was producing children for him the same way that Leah was. Leah felt compelled to continue her enterprise of building her team, of building her gedud. I did talk quite a bit about how difficult this is for those who are like me, are on Team Leah, that Leah made this almost this quote unquote selfish move in introducing Zilpah. But all I have to say about that was in the recording from last week. Yes, Serach. Serach is the golden girl of Asher. And so we'll talk more about Serach next week. You anticipated absolutely correctly. Contemporary.
But the letters work also.
Oh, look at that. Yes. Even though I do see sometimes Serach, even though for some reason the Samach also comes up quite a bit. And I'm not sure that Serach I know Serach in the Gemara is with the Samach. So I would imagine if she's with the Samach and the Gemara, then she would be in Tanakh as well. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
But I think she's connected to the Samach in the Torah because it's used as Serach HaOdef in the Mishkan, and as you will tell us next week, Serach is the one who lives almost forever, and
Yes.
the Odef means like the extra, the part that hangs on.
Okay. And that's with the samach. I will just I'm almost positive it's with the samach. But Rav Hirsch just demonstrated for us that, you want to sin or samach it, then you could play fast and loose with that, but I'm pretty sure it's samach.
Yeah.
Okay. Contemporary Hebrew linguists, especially academic scholars of Semitic linguistics and philology, generally review the etymologies offered by Rav Shamshon Hirsch with respect, but not as linguistically rigorous by modern standards. Could very well be. I just enjoy him as someone who, ben kotlei beit hamidrash, it's Rav Hirsch. So I don't know. I'm not a linguist by any stretch of the imagination. Many acknowledge Hirsch's etymologies as inspiring and morally insightful, but not authoritative as linguistic evidence. I do think, though, leave aside all of the plays on Aleph Ayin, Samach Sin, and how Asir and Otsar and Osher with an Ayin and an Aleph, all fundamentally do drive at the same concept. Like, I don't know enough beyond just to bring Rav Hirsch. I don't have any comment beyond that, but Asher definitely is that moving me forward in the sentence. So I guess one can argue, Mel, that if I want to look at a connection between Osher or Asher, Aleph Shin Resh, Ashrei, Asher, fortune, and what is that called again? That figure of speech when with Aleph Shin Resh is Asher, like, Baruch HaGever Asher Yivtach B'Hashem, right? Then that Asher, what's that? What I'm not an English teacher, so I don't know that. Here we go. This relative pronoun. Asher specifically functioning as a relative pronoun. I think that the letters Aleph Shin Resh must relate to all Aleph Shin Resh formulations. I just thought that was amazing. Ishruni Banot, Serach Bar Asher. Yes. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Yosef. Thank you, Mel. B'simcha. Let me just let 30 seconds, as I promised myself. Asher ben Yaakov. Probably, I have to admit, the Shevet that the least is written about, because he doesn't seem to have offended anyone. Although, again, I will bring one circumstance where he seems to have gotten into a little bit of trouble. And based on the brachot of Yaakov and Moshe, seems to be this wonderfully well-received and wealthy shevet. With, I have to say, one of the most beautiful nachalot, the Western Galilee. And we'll look a little bit more at his nachala next week. So I thank you all and wishing you all a wonderful week. Be well.